For centuries, criminals and wrongdoers around the world have secretly planned and plotted under our very noses. But some of those plans haven't stayed so secret. From the greatest diamond heist of the century to a daring prison escape that relied on a love triangle, the perpetrators of these sordid schemes never wanted their methods revealed. They'd hate this video then, because we're about to take a look at some of the most fascinating and elaborate plots that got exposed. McMillions Madness. If you're a fan of McDonald's, you're probably familiar with the annual Monopoly Millions promotion. Every year, menu items are stickered with little collectible game pieces that can be worth anything from free food to a big cash prize. But the bigger the prize, the rarer the ticket. I guess that's why the most I've ever won is a measly fruit bag. But some 30 years ago, American ex-police officer Jerome P. Jacobson netted himself over $24 million from the competition, which was supposed to be impossible. So, how did he do it? After retiring from the police force, Jacobson joined the company that made the Monopoly Millions stickers as the head of security. His job was to oversee their printing before transporting them safely to the packaging factories. For years, he ran a tight ship. But in 1989, Jacobson decided to test his luck. He slipped his brother a winning $25,000 piece, and when he cashed it in, nobody batted an eye. Filled with confidence, Jacobson began taking winning pieces, replacing them with non-winners, and selling the real winners on to friends and associates for a fraction of their worth. This went on for a few years. But then, in 1995, Jacobson mistakenly received a batch of tamper-resistant seals that were used to secure entire envelopes of winning tickets. Whereas before he'd been taking them little by little, he could now swap out whole batches of the winners and reseal the envelopes without anyone knowing. Before long, he was selling them to anyone who'd buy, including mobsters, strip club owners, and drug traffickers. This shady network of people around Jacobson won almost every single prize in the US for years, and Jacobson made a colossal $24 million from his scheme. However, in 2000, the FBI received an anonymous tip that one of the $1 million winners was a fraud. They launched a full-scale investigation and discovered that a huge cluster of winners lived close to each other in Florida, near to Jacobson's home. Suspicious, they began tapping Jacobson's phone along with countless others and caught him in the act. In the end, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison with a $12.5 million fine. I bet he wished those get-out-of-jail-free cards worked in real life. Darwin's death. Who doesn't love a good mystery? Well, in a missing persons case, the family of the person that's missing, usually. So when British teacher John Darwin disappeared after going canoeing back in March 2002 and was later pronounced dead, his 2 sons were, unsurprisingly, distraught. But their mother, Anne, was secretly over the moon. Wait, what? It turned out John wasn't dead. He was living safe and sound in a bedsit that connected to the family's home via a secret door hidden in a wardrobe. You see, John and Anne were overwhelmed with debt and had come up with an outrageous plan to get out of it. After he was declared legally dead in 2003, Anne took the role of grieving widow and claimed his first installment of life insurance, almost $35,000. Then, John got hold of a fake passport and the couple moved to Panama, continuing to collect John's fraudulent life insurance. Eventually, they racked up a huge $350,000 in illegitimate claims. All the while, their sons were none the wiser. But 5 years after John's initial disappearance, the lie came crumbling down. John, desperate to see his sons again, flew back to the UK and claimed he had amnesia. However, when a photo of him and his wife in Panama was uncovered, the ruse was well and truly over. The couple confessed to the plot and were sentenced to more than 6 years in prison each. Rightfully outraged, their sons refused to speak to them for months. So, always remember, faking your death and concealing it from your family might not be the answer to all your problems. You know what is, though? My channel. Okay, maybe I exaggerated there, but if you drop a like and subscribe down below, you can at least forget about your problems for a while and learn some amazing stuff at the same time. All done? Right, now what's next? Prince or pauper? We'd all love to be treated like royalty, but for esteemed Saudi Prince Khalid bin Al Saud, this dream was an astonishing reality. For 30 years, the prince had splashed the cash, buying expensive clothes, flashy jewelry, and eating in only the finest restaurants. He lived in a luxurious penthouse suite in the high-rise off the coast of Miami and made sure everybody on his Instagram knew about it. People both respected and feared the prince, but he was harboring one huge secret. Prince Khalid bin Al Saud was not a prince at all. He was a Colombian orphan called Anthony Gignac. Gignac was a serial conman who had honed his craft through impersonating many different Saudi royals over the years. He used the personas to dupe people into giving him pricey gifts and even managed to attain nearly $8 million by tricking a group of investors. They thought he owned lucrative shares in the oil company Saudi Aramco and paid him for them. But he lied and used the money to keep funding his lavish lifestyle. His Instagram account was nothing more than a tool to help convince people of his princely status, showing off to the world to cement the deception. But in 2017, Gignac's facade came crashing down. During some investment negotiations, real estate billionaire Donald Soffer noticed the prince eating pork, a meat Muslims don't consume for religious reasons, which all Saudi royals famously are. He also, stupidly, posted the meal on his Instagram. Suspicious, Soffer hired private investigators who uncovered Gignac's lie, and he was sentenced to 18 years in jail for fraud. I reckon he's gonna have a hard time making that prison cell look Instagrammable. Banksy's dinner party. If you're familiar with the British-based graffiti artist Banksy, you'll know that he's famous for keeping his identity top secret. So, when British actress Joan Collins received an invite to host a dinner party for the mysterious figure back in 2009, she accepted without hesitation. A number of other celebrity guests were also invited, and everybody arrived at a grand countryside house to meet the man behind the artwork. Sure enough, he showed up, and for 5 hours, Joan entertained him alongside the other guests, who were all taken in by Banksy's opinions on art and life. But there was just one catch. The man wasn't Banksy. It turns out the whole dinner party was an elaborate ploy dreamt up by businessman Ivan Massow. He'd set up and then filmed the entire thing with the intention of selling it to a TV broadcaster as the first time Banksy had revealed himself. Banksy was actually small-time actor Brian Lawrence, who should be big-time after that performance. Everybody at the party had fallen for the crazy scheme, and it was only afterwards that journalists dug around and exposed the plot. I wonder what the real Banksy thought about all this. If you're watching Banksy, let me know down in the comments below. Dubious Dali. In the world of fine art, fraudsters are everywhere. Back in May 2015, avid London art collector James Stunt knew this all too well. So, when he acquired a new, unknown piece of art by the famous Spanish surrealist Salvador Dali, he knew he had to authenticate it. He called Nicolas Ducharme the leading Dali expert and explained the painting was called Corpus Hypercubus 1953 and could be a forerunner to Corpus Hypercubus 1954, which was currently hung in the Vatican. Ducharme sped to London, but upon examining the painting, judged it to be a fake. It was, Descharnes said, actually a convincing replica legally produced by one Tony Tetreault, who sold them for a living. For a second opinion, Descharnes gave Stunt the contact details of fellow expert Frank Hunter, then parted ways. But 4 years later, he got a big shock. In 2019, Hunter got in touch with Descharnes and told him that he'd received an email, supposedly from Descharnes himself, confirming that the painting was real. But the email had actually been sent by Stunt, who'd edited and forwarded Descharnes' email to say it was real. He'd also received an invoice addressed to Stunt from art megadealer David Nahmad, implying Stunt had bought the painting from him. The thing is, Nahmad denied ever owning it. What's more, Hunter had also received a third document. This one was a copy of an agreement between Stunt and the historical Scottish estate Dumfries House. Stunt had leased the painting to the estate, claiming it had been examined professionally and proven to be real. Another lie. When confronted, Stunt denied any fraud, but Tony Tetreault came forward and said outright that he'd sold Stunt 11 different replicas. And Stunt hadn't just leased one to Dumfries House, he'd leased 17, worth over $143 million. Had they been real, that is. When this news broke, Dumfries House took all of the fakes down immediately. And now, well, the once billionaire James Stunt was declared bankrupt after plunging deep into debt. It seems this little stunt is well and truly over. Escape from Alcatraz. Of all the stories around historical prison escapes, there's none more famous than that of the convicts who made it out of the inescapable prison on Alcatraz Island back in June 1962. To this day, they still haven't been caught. But how exactly did they escape? After noticing that the ventilation ducts beneath their cell sinks could be widened, Clarence Anglin, John Anglin, and Frank Morris saw an opportunity. They hoarded old spoons and saw blades they found on the prison grounds, and even made a makeshift electric drill from the motor of a vacuum cleaner. Using these far from ideal tools, they hacked away at the ducts every night for months. Finally, once the ducts were wide enough to squeeze through, they could access an unguarded utility corridor behind, where they set up a secret workshop. Every night, they put dummy heads in their beds, made from papier-mâché and real hair, then headed through the holes. Once inside the workshop, they crafted life preservers and a rubber raft, using raincoats stolen from the prison shop. When these were ready, the inmates waited until the night of June 11th, then crawled once more into the utility corridor. This time, they climbed up through an air vent using pipes as footholds until they emerged onto the roof. Another pipe allowed them to slide down outside the walls of the prison, where they were greeted with two 12-foot-tall barbed wire fences. Once over those, they inflated the raincoat raft using a modified concertina as a set of bellows and sailed off into the night. Although scraps of the boat were found washed up on the shore later, no evidence has ever been found of the escapees themselves. What do you think? Did they escape or fall at the last hurdle? Let me know down in the comments. App attack. One of the main reasons people use messaging apps like WhatsApp is because of the end-to-end encryption they offer, guaranteeing private messages stay private. It's also why criminals love to use them. The authorities know this, however, and recently the FBI teamed up with the Australian police force to pull off one of the biggest cyber busts ever. How? They made their own encrypted messaging app called Anom and took down a whole load of competitor apps at the same time. Before long, criminals of all shapes and sizes had come flocking to the service, including Australia's most wanted man, Hakan Ayik, who vouched for it to his associates. But while their messages were encrypted, they were encrypted between themselves and the FBI. Over 9,000 law enforcement officers sifted through an insane 27 million messages during the 18-month operation. They watched as robberies were planned, drug shipments were discussed, and even saw hits put out on people. And then, with all the evidence they needed, they struck. In total, a whopping 32 tons of drugs, 250 firearms, 55 luxury vehicles, and more than $48 million worth of cash were caught in the sting. Not to mention over 800 very surprised criminals arrested. It's safe to say the operation was an enormous success. Dark Secret. Some time ago, in the bustling German city of Bochum, plainclothes police officers started noticing something very strange. Expensive cars kept driving down an alleyway by an old, unused bar. Their drivers would get out, walk through a door into the building, and disappear for hours. After observing this for most of the day, the officers decided to go in and investigate. On walking through the door, however, the place seemed as abandoned as it appeared to be from the outside. The bar itself looked as if it had been untouched for years, as did the chairs and tables. But there had to be something more going on. Determined, the officers pushed on until they came to a set of stairs leading to the basement. After following them down, they found what they were looking for. A small, secret door was hidden in the wall. With a firm push, it creaked open, and after peeking through the dark hole, they were shocked at what they saw. There was a whole hidden room, with 3 people sat around a table in the smoky space, playing poker. Looking around, the officers saw 2 more people stood at slot machines. Quickly, they climbed through and took the details of everybody present. But why were they there? Well, this wasn't some 1920s speakeasy, but a scene that happened at the beginning of 2021. Due to the COVID pandemic, Bochum was in lockdown, so hall bars were closed and group meetups were banned. Therefore, a group of rebellious gamblers had decided to set up their own makeshift casino where they thought nobody would find them. I think they'll have needed more than a good poker face to get out of that one, though. Kentucky Fried Tunnel. When I was a kid, I used to love the idea of secret passageways and tunnels leading to all kinds of magical places. But sadly, I'm not a kid anymore, and now I know they're much more likely to be used for smuggling stuff like illegal narcotics. In August 2018, police patrolling the border between Arizona and Mexico pulled over suspected drug dealer Ivan Lopez near an old KFC joint that he owned. But this guy definitely wasn't delivering chicken to the Colonel. Instead, they found over 370 pounds of hard drugs in the back of his van. And after searching the KFC, they also found a pretty sizable hole in the floor that led into a 22 feet deep, 600 feet long passageway. That's about as long as the Washington Monument is high. The huge tunnel went underground in Arizona, continued past the border, and ended up under a bed in a home in Mexico. The police were quite certain that it was used to smuggle drugs into the country. But part of me wants to believe somebody loved popcorn chicken so much that they just needed a direct route to it from their bedroom. Diamonds are for stealing. In February 2003, the largest diamond heist in history took place in Antwerp, Belgium. Dubbed the heist of the century, it resulted in over $100 million worth of diamonds being stolen against near impossible odds. The vault itself was beneath the Antwerp Diamond Center in the heavily policed diamond district of the city. It had a lock with over 100 million possible combinations, infrared heat sensors, a movement sensor, and a multitude of other security systems. Oh, and a private security force operating within the building. Man, is this real or the set of a new Ocean's 11 film? Even for professional thief and mastermind Leonardo Notarbartolo, it was going to be a tough job. But he wasn't alone. Notarbartolo orchestrated the heist with a team of 4 other professional criminals under the aliases Speedy, the Monster, the Genius, and the King of Keys. Notarbartolo posed as a diamond merchant for 18 months before the robbery itself and frequented the Diamond Center regularly, covertly taking pictures with a camera pen. Security loosened up the more they got used to him, and he managed to hide a small camera above the vault door. Crucially, this recorded the guards entering the door code. All the while, the rest of the crew practiced relentlessly for the big day using an exact scale replica of the vault interior, produced for them by a corrupt diamond trader. The day before the robbery, Notarbartolo made a routine visit to the vault and sprayed hairspray on the thermal sensors so they wouldn't be able to function. The next day, he sat in a getaway vehicle outside and waited. To avoid the security presence around the bank, the King of Keys picked the lock of an abandoned office building adjacent to it. The squad moved through this building, across a private garden, and climbed up a ladder to get into the bank through an unguarded terrace. An infrared sensor blocked their path, but the genius used a homemade polyester shield to block it. Then they descended some stairs into the vault's antechamber. The vault door had both a number pad and a physical lock. They entered the code, then the King of Keys took out a huge foot-long key. Incredibly, he'd forged it from examining the secret video footage. They opened the vault door and flipped the lights to avoid tripping the light sensors. Although it was pitch black, their practice in the replica vault meant they knew where everything was. The monster disabled the remaining sensors. Then they broke open over 100 safety deposit boxes and emptied hordes of diamonds, gold, and jewelry into duffel bags. Hours later, at 5:30 a.m., they left undetected. The whole operation would have stayed that way too, were it not for Speedy. While disposing of evidence, the anxious crew member had a panic attack and hastily threw documents relating to the bank into some bushes. They were found and eventually traced back to Notarbartolo, and in the next few weeks, everyone was tracked down and sentenced to prison time, apart from the King of Keys, who's still missing along with all the diamonds. I guess they don't call him the king for nothing. Shawshank Shocker. We've all heard stories of escaped convicts, but none escaped in quite the same way cell neighbors Richard Matt and David Sweat did when they tried to break out of Clinton Correctional Facility back in 2015. During their time at the prison, the pair had become, shall we say, close to the prison tailor Joyce Mitchell. Clearly a fan of a bad boy or two, she'd started crushing on them both. Hard. Because of this, she began doing favors for them. Like a psychopathic Ronald McDonald, she hid hacksaw blades, chisels, and other tools in hamburger meat, and was able to pass them everything they needed to make their daring escape. But Joyce wasn't the only one on the inside helping the terrible twosome. A prison guard called Gene Palmer was a particular fan of Richard. He used to paint celebrity portraits while in his cell, and Gene had taken a liking to them. In return for the art, he let Richard and David go past the prison's metal detectors, allowing them to smuggle the tools Joyce gave them into their cells. Once they'd acquired everything they needed, they got to work cutting through their metal cell walls. It took months of work, but eventually they broke through, accessing the shaft behind. Following it down, they reached a steel pipe wide enough to crawl through, which they knew led to the outside. Richard and David got to work on this next, and even though they used loud power drills, nobody came to investigate. Eventually, they finished carving their path to escape. Joyce, still enamored with the pair, had agreed to meet them in a getaway car at the pipe's opening on the 5th of June. Well, the day for the escape finally came, and they made their way through the shaft, leaving behind several notes mocking their ex-captors. One, stuck on the pipe, had a pretty obscene picture drawn on it, along with the words, "Have a nice day." However, once they'd made it out into the free world, their plan came apart. Joyce was nowhere to be seen. The prison worker got cold feet at the last minute. The pair were forced to scramble and managed to evade recapture for 3 weeks. Unfortunately for them, though, the cops caught up in the end and didn't hold their fire. David was the only one that made it, and he's still behind bars today. Joyce was sentenced to 7 years for her role, while Jean got off with just 6 months prison time and $5,000 in fines. The real lesson here is never get involved in a prison love triangle, I guess. Numbers up. Back in 2007, China was shaken by the biggest and most unbelievable bank robbery the country had ever seen. The man who started it all was Ren Xiaofeng, an unhappy worker for the Agricultural Bank of China. One day, he came up with a frankly insane idea. He'd secretly rob the bank, use the stolen cash to buy lottery tickets, win the lottery, then replace what he'd stolen. Then nobody would ever know. Somehow, he convinced the 2 bank managers, who both held vault keys, to help, and the trio got to work. Due to slacking security, the men successfully stole the equivalent of around $12,500. Ren took his cut, spent it all on lottery tickets, and, despite the insane odds, won. What's more, using his winnings, he kept buying tickets and managed to win again. With enough cash to replace everything they'd stolen and then some, he could have stopped there. But he had a taste for it now. His old accomplices, unwilling to keep stealing, quit the operation. So he cajoled a new employee into helping him, Ma Jiangqing. Together, over many months, they robbed the vault over and over and over. But no matter how much money they took, Ren just couldn't seem to win a third time. Eventually, the 2 were in debt to the bank by a staggering $4.3 million. In desperation, they hatched a last-ditch effort to gain their money back and replace the lost vault cash. If they stole enough tickets to win the jackpot, they'd be saved. In April 2007, Ren and Ma walked straight into the bank in broad daylight, entered the vault, and packed $2.3 million worth of cash into safe deposit boxes. Then they brazenly walked past the guards with it, got in Ren's van, and raced around the city dishing the cash out to crooked lottery ticket sellers they knew. Hundreds of thousands of tickets later, and they still didn't win. The pair split what little cash they had left and went on the run. However, both were found, arrested, and received the toughest penalty for their crimes that China offers: execution. Ren and Ma live on in Chinese legend, though, and serve as rather morbid reminders that trying your luck doesn't always work. Okay then, that's just about all the plotting my brain can keep up with for one day. Which plot were you most surprised or impressed by? Let me know down in the comments below, and as always, thanks for watching.